Hey, how you doing today? When you ain't got it all figured out, and you never do. So, what's my secret? What's my method that I want to share with you today so that you can enjoy and live your life? Because life is short, and I want you to be finding your freedom, and I want you to be happy. So, what do you do when you ain't quite got it figured out? Welcome to Goose Pond Hideout with Rob. So, it's bitter cold here today. It's like 33 degrees, which is way, way cold for us down here in the south. Our normal lows like 42, 45, and we should be up in the upper 50s in the afternoon, and it's gray and gloomy and the wind's bitter blowing. I got my jacket on today, and I'm sitting in front of the wood pile so that I'm out of the wind because it's crazy cold here today. So when you ain't got it all figured out, and the thing is, nobody does. And I'm going to share with you how I deal with that and what it's not really a secret, my method for how I've gone through my life to get to where I am here now. So let's jump right into that. And the thing is, like when you're a young person, when you're a adolescent, young teenager, until you get full of yourself and that, you always think like your parents have it all figured out and all got it together, right? And then as you get older, you realize they're just winging it too, that nobody ever actually has it all together. And, a lot of people have to deal with fear. I get questions all the time about how do you deal with the fear of trying to do something new when you're, ain't got it together and you're trying to figure it out, and you want to try new things, but you're afraid to do it. And I mean, the way I look at life, the way I've always looked at life as long as I can remember, is I think of life like a chapter book. So you're in one chapter now, and your life is reading the pages of that chapter, and at some point in time you get to the end of that chapter, and when you turn the page, you're in a new chapter. And that's just life, is one chapter after another until you get to the end of your book. So don't read too fast because you don't want to get to the end, right? But is, think about, like, if you go all the way back to a baby, first learns to crawl. And then you can kind of, being silly about it, you can think, well, that's in there, they're like, hey, I figured out how to crawl. I'm good to go in life. And I'm crawling around and crawling around. Well, at some point, you've got to end that chapter of crawling, and now you learn to walk. And then you're in that chapter of your life, and you're learning to walk, and then you head off to kindergarten, and then you go to you get used to all your friends and the routine of that school. Then all of a sudden, now you're off to middle school, and then you're off to high school, and then you're maybe going to college, or you're off on your own getting a job, you're moving out of the house. And all these things are chapters, and it's scary. You're like, how do I deal with that? And again, that's why I just look at it as a chapter. And if you're unhappy with the chapter that you're in, you just turn the page and start a new chapter. Because the thing is, once you think that you got everything figured out, you don't, right? And you might as well be making the decisions yourself when you choose to do it, rather than being reactive and a passenger in your life and letting other people make the choices for you. And, an example is, I went to college, and when I got out of college, I got a corporate job. And, I thought, hey, I'm all set. I'm living in an apartment. It was a rental condo. It was a condo unit that the owner was renting out, and it was a nice place. And I was, had my corporate job, and I was salaried. I didn't even have to, punch a time clock or anything like that. I just showed up to work and worked, and then I just, went home. And man, I thought I thought life was set. I got it all figured out, right? Got life all figured out. Got my condo apartment, and I got my nice car. I had a Volkswagen Jetta, brand new back then. I actually bought it right out of the showroom floor. The only brand new car I ever bought in my whole life, because I learned that insanity really pretty quick. But when you're in your early 20s and you get caught up into that hamster wheel, and which is exactly what it was. I was in that hamster wheel, had a nice condo, had a nice car, had a nice corporate job, and the big boss came along and said, we've sold the company, to somebody out in California, so hey, you got no job anymore. And so I had to react to not having a job. And that could be, when it happens like that, you could be like, geez, I've got a condo I got to pay for. I got a brand new car. I got a monthly payment I got to pay for. Now I've lost my job. What am I going to do? So you have to react, and you have to get yourself together. But the thing is you figure it out, right? No matter how old you are, if you're a teenager, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 90s, you're always, ain't got it figured out. You're always trying to figure out how to live your life and where you're going next. And no matter how much, that chapter, you enjoy it, at some point you got to turn the page and go to a new chapter. And you might as well be the one picking when to do it, because again, the minute you think you got it all figured out, you don't. And again, using the kids. I had a lot of, back when I was in the real world, working at a real world job there, I chatted with lots of teenagers, and they'd be graduating from high school, and, they're like, geez, I'm supposed to have my life all figured out. And I'd be like, you're 18 years old. You've been a kid your whole life. How can you possibly know what you want to do until you get out there and start doing different things? So, the old, what's a good analogy? Throw Jell-O against the wall and kind of see what sticks. You just have to do stuff. And what happens if I try something and I fail? Well, you tried something and you failed. And again, then you just turn the page in that chapter to the next chapter. You're not stuck there. My life took some bad turns when I was older, and I said, hey, I'm really turning the page. I'm going to go 2 or 3 chapters, and I'm selling everything that we own, and bought sailboat, and moved on to the sailboat, and to completely start a new phase in my life. And people would be like, what do you know about sailing? What happens if there's a hurricane? What happens if your boat gets a hole in it? What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And I'm like, it's just one chapter in my life. I've decided that the next chapter is going to be me living on a sailboat, and I'm going to enjoy that chapter, and I'm going to experience what that has to offer me. I'm going to learn, about sailing a big boat, and, fixing the oven and fixing the refrigerator and fixing all those things, and going from, place to place in the ocean along the Gulf Coast down there. And if a storm comes or that, I'll deal with it. And I'll just be winging it. And then, they're like, well, what happens when you get tired of doing that? Well, eventually I did. We got tired of living on the sailboat, and we said, hey, we've read this chapter of our life for 9 years. So, what's going to be in the next chapter? And that's when we came, here to this homestead. And, we just sold the boat and bought the homestead. And it's just, your family, your friends, your co-workers, they like the status quo. They don't want to rock the boat. They just want to keep, change is, they're fearful, scared of change, so they don't want you to do anything different either. And if you want to give up smoking, all your smoking friends are, going to try to talk you out of it. If you're overweight, like almost every one of us is these days, and you decide you're going to go to the gym and exercise and eat better foods and that, all your family and friends in that, they're going to, in the weird way, try to talk you out of doing that, because it, says that they should probably be thinking about changing too. And if you're in a job that you don't like, turn the page and go to the next chapter and just say, I'm out of here. I'm going to go get a different job. Maybe you're in a relationship when you're younger, in your 20s, and you think you've met the person and it's just everything is perfect and you're in love and you're going to, live the rest of your life, and you're imagining the big house with the white picket fence and the 2 cars in the driveway and a couple of kids, and you just have this vision of, your life, you're all set, and you ain't got it figured out. And the minute you think you do, the person says, this isn't really the relationship that I want, and you're not the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, so I'm out of here. And you're going to be devastated, and you're going to be like, well, I had my life all planned out, and, now this came crashing down on me, and what am I going to do now? Well, you pick yourself up, just like the toddler learning to walk. Be careful, Bonnie, because it's kind of precarious here. My big blue heeler dog's walking by. No, don't go by the camera. And, you just figure it out. You just move along, do the next thing. And, that's the way that it is. But, the minute you got it figured out, you don't. Life is short. Find your freedom. I want you to be happy and think. When you ain't got it figured out, you don't. That the minute you think you got it figured out, you don't, because you ain't got it figured out. And no matter how old you get, no matter what place you are in your life, whether it's, you're in your 20s or 30s, the minute you think you've got everything set, something's going to happen and you're going to have to start a new chapter. And that's just, it happens to all of us. You just always, the minute you think you can sit back and relax, you can't. And you got to just keep pressing forward and keep figuring things out, because, you're in your 60s and you're looking back at people in your 20s and you're kind of giggling and laughing because they think the world's going to end with the problems that they've got. But, you've already lived through all that. And they're looking forward at the problem and you're looking backwards at the problem. And that happens, if you're in your 60s, you've got certain problems, and people in their 80s and 90s are looking back at you thinking, you'll figure it out, right? So do that, because it's all about, you ain't got it figured out, so find your freedom. Freedom!